Do you hear it? The echoes of the past, the whispers of forgotten truths, fragments of memories lost in the shadows. Welcome to BRAINROT, Echoes, where we bring you stories long buried, unravel mysteries cloaked by time, and guide you through the darkest corners of the mind and the universe. Each video is more than just content. It's an echo resonating deep within, urging you to question, to wonder, to explore. Backend index pointing right, hit subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and join us in listening to the echoes the world tried to silence. A lesson from the Deathworld. And that, class, is why the Vergoy Treaty of 3421 established the galactic classification system for planetary habitation zones. Professor Kthar tapped his three-fingered stylus against the projection, his 6 eyes blinking in sequence. Now, moving on to today's practical demonstration. Wait, we're actually having a demonstration. The question came from somewhere in the back of the amphitheater, the rustling of data pads and the shifting of various appendages indicating a sudden spike in attention among the previously half-slept xenobiology students. Professor Kthar's mouth parts stretched into what passed for a smile on his species. Indeed, Xylos, today is a special occasion. As you know, this advanced xenobiology course is one of the most prestigious in the galactic university system. And today, he paused dramatically. We have the honor of hosting not one but 2 rare specimens. The class collectively leaned forward. Even Phlox, who typically spent the lectures in a state of semi-hibernation, perked up his sensory stalks. First, the professor continued, pressing a button on his console. We have a Class 3 predator from the Pyrian moon system. A circular platform in the center of the room began to rise from the floor. On it stood a reinforced containment field, and within that, holy cosmic debris, someone gasped. The creature inside the field was approximately the size of a standard cargo container, with gleaming obsidian scales and 8 limbs that ended in what could only be described as natural biological scythes. Its head was dominated by a maw lined with crystalline teeth, each as long as a Zarlaxian's arm. For yellow eyes tracked around the room with predatory precision. This, Professor Kthar announced, is a juvenile Pyrian thornback, one of the apex predators of its ecosystem and responsible for the extinction of 12 different species on its home moon. The containment field is, of course, rated at level 9 security, so there's absolutely no chance of... A loud crack interrupted him as one of the creature's limbs struck the energy barrier, causing it to flicker momentarily. Several students screamed. One fainted. 3 others instinctively engaged their respective species' defense mechanisms. One puffed up to twice his size, another exuded a noxious cloud of green vapor, and a third simply disappeared, her adaptive camouflage rendering her invisible. MMH, Professor Kthar continued, seemingly unperturbed. As I was saying, there's no chance of any danger. This thornback is from a Class 3 Deathworld, which means gravity approximately 1.5 standard units, atmospheric pressure of 1.6, and temperature fluctuations between 280 and 330 Kelvin. Quite uncomfortable for most of us. I'm sure you'll agree. The class murmured in agreement, their eyes still fixed on the predator, which had begun scientifically testing the containment field for weaknesses. But the professor raised a limb for emphasis. That's nothing compared to our second guest. He pressed another button, and a second platform began to rise beside the first. May I present a genuine Class 5 Deathworlder. The tension in the room was palpable. Class 5 worlds were the stuff of nightmares. Planets so hostile that they were considered virtually uninhabitable by civilized standards. The gravitational forces alone would crush most species, not to mention the toxic atmospheres, extreme temperatures, and lethal radiation levels. The second containment field materialized, and within it stood what was rather anticlimactic. The creature was bipedal, covered in some kind of artificial fabric rather than natural armor, with a bizarrely flat face dominated by forward-facing eyes and a small, unimpressive mouth. It had only 2 arms, ending in what appeared to be manipulator digits rather than proper weapons. It stood there, seemingly relaxed, hands in the pockets of its lower coverings, looking around the classroom with obvious interest. This, Professor Kthar announced with a flourish, is a human from the planet Earth, a Class 5 Deathworld, the most extreme environment ever to produce a space-faring civilization. The class stared at the human, then at the thornback, then back at the human again. The comparison was, frankly, laughable. Professor, a student with membranous wings raised an appendage. Are you sure you didn't mix up the specimens? The thornback looks much more impressive. An excellent observation, Nexwile. Professor Kthar shook his mandibles, vibrating with amusement. And exactly the point of today's demonstration. Appearances can be deceiving, especially in xenobiology. Inside the second containment field, the human raised a hand. Hi there, I'm Kale. Nice to meet you all. His voice was transmitted through the field's communication system, sounding oddly casual for a being from a planet that should by all rights have produced only monsters. The class stared in collective bewilderment. Now, for the educational portion of our demonstration, the professor activated a small hovering drone that flew into the thornback's containment field. The drone projected a holographic image of what appeared to be the thornback's natural prey, a six-legged herbivore with a thick protective shell. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The thornback let out a screech that made several students recoil, despite the soundproofing of the containment field. It launched itself at the hologram with shocking speed, all 8 of its blade limbs extended for the kill. When it passed through the hologram, its rage seemed to intensify, and it began systematically attacking the drone itself, which nimbly evaded its strikes. Classic predatory response, Professor Kthar narrated. Note the immediate target acquisition, the commitment to the attack, and the persistence even after the initial strike fails. This is characteristic of apex predators from resource-scarce environments, where each successful hunt is critical to survival. The drone retreated, and the thornback continued to pace its enclosure, its yellow eyes still tracking the device warily. Now, let's observe our Class 5 Deathworlder's response to a similar stimulus. The drone flew into Kale's containment field and projected the same holographic prey animal. The human looked at it with mild interest, then folded his arms and looked back at the professor. Am I supposed to do something with this? He asked. The class erupted in confused chatter. Oh my stars, is it defective? Maybe humans aren't predators after all. Perhaps it's just more intelligent and recognizes it's not real. Professor Kthar raised his limbs for silence. An excellent learning moment, Mr. Kale. Humans are omnivores with predatory ancestry, correct? Yeah, that's right, Kale confirmed. Then perhaps we need a more appropriate stimulus. The professor adjusted something on his control panel, and the drone's hologram changed to display what appeared to be some kind of small, furry creature scurrying across the floor of the containment field. Kale watched it with slightly more interest, but made no move to attack. Still nothing, Professor Kthar mused. Fascinating. Let's try one more. The hologram changed again, this time showing what appeared to be a wrapped package labeled chocolate in galactic standard. Kale's eyes sharpened almost imperceptibly, and he moved, not with the explosive violence of the thornback, but with a casual, controlled gait that somehow covered the distance to the drone with surprising efficiency. He reached out and passed his hand through the hologram, then said, "Nice try, Professor. I know chocolate when I see it, and that's just a picture." Remarkable restraint, Professor Kthar exclaimed, turning to address the class. This highlights a key difference between predatory species from different planetary classifications. The thornback, evolving on a Class 3 world, relies on immediate, all-out aggression to secure resources. The human, from a far more hostile Class 5 environment, has developed precision, patience, and the ability to conserve energy, crucial adaptations when living in a gravity well nearly twice what most of us would consider tolerable. A student with a gelatinous body raised a pseudopod. But Professor, if humans are so well adapted to extreme conditions, why don't they look more dangerous? An excellent question, Blobby. Professor Kthar replied. Mr. Kale, would you care to address this? Kale shrugged. We don't need to look dangerous. Earth has plenty of animals with big teeth, claws, venom, you name it. But we're still the apex predators. Because of these, he tapped his temple, and these, he wiggled his fingers. Exactly. Professor Kthar's voice took on the enthusiastic tone of an animator in his element. Humans represent an evolutionary path where intelligence, tool use, and endurance became more advantageous than physical weaponry. Now for the most instructive part of our demonstration. The professor pressed a sequence of buttons on his console. With Mr. Kale's prior consent, of course, we're going to introduce a controlled threat stimulus to observe defensive responses. The containment field around the thornback emitted a mild electric shock. The creature reacted instantly, hissing and striking at the invisible barrier with renewed fury. Its scales bristled, revealing rows of secondary defensive spines that glowed with bioluminescent warning colors. Classic threat display. Professor Kthar elucidated. Designed to intimidate potential attacks. Effective against most predators in its native ecosystem. He then activated the stimulus for Kale's containment field. A similar mild shock was applied. Kale flinched slightly, then frowned. "Hey, that one was stronger than you said it would be," he called out. "Apologies," Professor Kthar responded, though the set of his mandibles suggested this might have been intentional. "Now, class, observe that the human's immediate response is vocal communication rather than physical display. This is characteristic of social predators who..." A sudden commotion from the thornback's containment field interrupted him. The creature had begun hurling itself against the energy barrier with increasing force. With each impact, the field's luminosity fluctuated more dramatically. "Professor," one of the students pointed out, "an alarm. The field integrity is dropping." Professor Kthar checked his console, his previously confident demeanor faltering. "That's not supposed to happen. The field should automatically compensate for." A loud crack echoed through the amphitheater as one of the thornback's limbs penetrated partially through the weakened barrier. Alarms began to sound, and red emergency lights flashed throughout the room. "Remain calm," Professor Kthar called out, though his own voice had risen several octaves. "The secondary containment protocols will..." Another violent impact, and the energy field collapsed entirely. The thornback let out a triumphant shriek that sent most of the class scrambling toward the exits. Professor Kthar frantically pressed buttons on his console, but the backup system seemed to be malfunctioning as well. "Evacuate the classroom," he shouted. "Security protocols are failing. This is not part of the demonstration." In the chaos, few noticed what was happening in the second containment field. Kale had stepped forward, his posture suddenly more alert, more focused. He tapped a control on the inside of his field. "Professor, drop my containment too," he called out. "What? No. You must evacuate with the others." Professor Kthar was backing away from his console as the thornback leaped from its platform and advanced toward him, its yellow eyes fixed on what it seemed to perceive as the controlling entity in the room. "Professor, that thing is going to kill you in about 3 seconds if you don't drop my field," Kale said, his voice eerily calm amidst the pandemonium. Whether it was panic or a moment of trust, Professor Kthar slapped a large emergency release button before turning to flee. The energy field around Kale discharged just as the thornback launched itself towards the retreating professor. What happened next happened so quickly that those students who hadn't yet escaped would later debate exactly what they'd witnessed. Kale moved, not with the frantic speed of prey fleeing a predator, but with the measured, efficient motion of something accustomed to operating in a gravity well nearly twice what the thornback evolved in. He intercepted the creature in mid-leap, ducking under its scything limbs and positioning himself between it and the professor. The thornback, momentarily surprised by this new obstacle, redirected its attack toward Kale. Razor-sharp limbs lashed out simultaneously in what should have been an unavoidable death sentence. But Kale wasn't where the attacks landed. He had shifted his position with a precision that seemed physically impossible, allowing the deadly appendages to slice through empty air. In the same motion, he reached out and grasped one of the creature's limbs near a joint, applying leverage in a way that caused the thornback to lose balance. The thing about being from a Class 5 Deathworld Kale called out conversationally, as if he wasn't in the middle of a life-or-death struggle, is that you get really good at calculating physics on the fly. The thornback recovered, spinning quickly to face Kale with a hiss that displayed rows of its crystalline teeth. It was clearly reassessing this unexpected threat, its predatory instincts recalibrating. Also, Kale continued, circling to maintain distance. When you grow up in 1.9 standard gravity, you develop about 3 times the muscle density of most species. Comes in handy sometimes. The thornback charged again, this time employing a different attack pattern. Instead of going for a direct strike, it feinted to one side before slashing from another angle. Kale dropped and rolled, a movement that looked almost leisurely compared to the thornback's frenetic speed, yet somehow resulted in him being exactly where he needed to be. As he came up, he grabbed a piece of broken equipment from the floor and hurled it with startling precision. The projectile struck one of the thornback's eyes, causing it to screech in pain and momentarily back away. And that, Kale added, is what you get from evolving on a planet where throwing things accurately became an evolutionary advantage. We turn into sports, actually, baseball, javelin, basketball. The remaining students watched in astonishment as the human continued to evade the increasingly frustrated predator. It wasn't just that he was surviving. He was controlling the engagement, keeping the thornback's attention fixed on him and away from the cowering professor and students. University security will be here in approximately 90 seconds, Kale called out, checking a device on his wrist while simultaneously sidestepping another attack. Everyone should continue evacuating. Professor, is there anything that might calm this thing down? Any weaknesses? Professor Kthar, who had taken refuge behind an overturned desk, called back in a shaky voice. Pyrrhian thornbacks are sensitive to ultraviolet light. It simulates their sun's radiation storms, which drive them to seek shelter. Great, Kale shouted. Anyone got a UV light handy? No. Figures. The thornback, perhaps sensing that its prey was distracted, suddenly launched a coordinated attack with all 8 limbs, creating a virtual cage of slashing blades. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed that Kale had finally miscalculated. Then, in a move that defied the intuitive physics of everyone watching, he drove forward rather than backward, slipping into the narrow gap between 2 of the creature's limbs before they could close. The maneuver placed him directly under the thornback's armored body. This is probably going to hurt, he grunted before driving both fists upward in what appeared to be a hazardous joint in the creature's underside. The thornback emitted a shriek unlike anything heard before, a sound of pain rather than rage. It tried to curl inward to protect itself, but Kale was already rolling away, coming up on his feet behind the creature. Class 5 Deathworlder strength, he explained to no one in particular, flexing his fingers. Also, opposable thumbs, really underrated adaptation. The thornback turned to face him again, but its movements were now more hesitant. One of its limbs dragged slightly, apparently damaged by Kale's strike. Look, Kale addressed the creature, as if it might understand. This isn't going well for either of us. You're hurt, I'm getting tired, and neither of us signed up for an actual fight to the death. So how about we call it a draw? The thornback's response was another charge, though noticeably slower than before. Yeah, didn't think that would work, Kale muttered. He hurried around the room, clearly looking for something. His eyes landed on the professor's abandoned console. Hey, Professor, does that thing control the classroom lighting? Yes, Professor Kthar called back. The spectral range adjusts to accommodate different species visual. Great. When I say now, crank the UV to maximum. Kale began backing toward the console, drawing the thornback away from the remaining students. But the controls are on this side, the professor protested. Just get ready to hit whatever button makes it happen. Kale called back, just as the thornback lunged once more. This time, instead of evading, Kale grabbed 2 of the creature's forelimbs. For a suspended moment, they were locked together, the human's muscles straining against the alien predator's natural weapons. Then, with a sudden twist that utilized the creature's own momentum, Kale spun the thornback around and sent it crashing into the console. Now, he shouted, Professor Kthar scrambled from his hiding place and slapped a sequence of controls on his backup remote. Instantly, the amphitheater was bathed in light that to most species present appeared only as a slight bluish tinge. To the thornback, however, the effect was dramatic. The creature immediately ceased its attack, its body language shifting from aggressive to defensive. It curled its limbs inward and began backing away, seeking shelter from the perceived radiation storm. "That's it," Kale said, his voice quietly calm now. "Just like a thunderstorm back home, right? Time to find a nice cave and wait it out." He began slowly herding the creature toward its original containment platform, where the field projectors, though damaged, were still partially functional. The thornback, now fully in retreat mode, offered minimal resistance. By the time university security burst into the room, Kale had managed to guide the predator back onto the platform, and Professor Kthar had established a weakened but functional containment field. Situations under control, Kale informed the security team, who stood frozen in the doorway, their weapon arrays powered up but untargeted as they tried to process the scene before them. Though you might want to check your emergency response time. Not super impressive, guys. Word of the incident spread through the university faster than a quantum entanglement cascade. By evening, the campus infonet was saturated with eyewitness accounts, most of them growing more exaggerated with each retelling. In one version, Kale had allegedly ripped one of the thornback's limbs off and beaten it into submission with it. In another, he had communicated with the creature telepathically, convincing it to return to its containment voluntarily. The truth, while less fantastical, was impressive enough on its own, a fact that became apparent during the official review meeting called by university administration the following day. "Completely irresponsible," Chancellor Vox was saying, her crystalline form glittering with agitation as she addressed Professor Kthar. "Bringing a Class 3 predator into a standard classroom with inadequate measures. You're fortunate no one was killed." They sat around a circular table in the administrative tower's conference room. Chancellor Vox, Professor Kthar, the head of university security, a representative from the ethics committee, and, somewhat uncomfortably, Kale himself. "With all due respect, Chancellor," Professor Kthar replied, his mandibles clicking nervously. The containment field was rated well above the standard requirements for a specimen of that classification. The equipment failure was unprecedented and is still being investigated. That's hardly the point. The Chancellor's voice took on a higher resonance, indicating extreme displeasure in her species. "The fact remains that you placed students in danger and nearly caused an interspecies incident. Do you have any idea what would happen if word got out that we nearly got a human killed during a routine class demonstration?" "Actually," Kale interjected, raising a hand like he was still in class, "I'm fine, really. Got a couple of scratches, but nothing serious. Human skin's tougher than it looks." All eyes turned to him, expressions ranging from disbelief to curiosity. "That is exactly the issue, Mr. Kale," Chancellor Vox said, her tone softening slightly. "Your species' diplomatic relationship with the Galactic Federation is still in its infancy. An incident like this could have set back interspecies relations considerably. Or advanced them," the Ethics Committee representative suggested, speaking up for the first time, a Morgie with feather-like sensory appendages that constantly shifted colors. She had been observing the discussion with obvious fascination. "This incident has provided unprecedented data on human capabilities under stress, information that might normally take decades of careful cultural exchange to obtain. Dr. Frill," the Chancellor warned, "this is hardly the time to pursue your research interests." "No, Chancellor," Dr. Frill replied, her feathers shifting to an inquisitive blue. "This may be exactly the time. Mr. Kale's actions yesterday challenged several established xenobiological paradigms." She turned to address Kale directly. "Your physical capabilities appear to exceed projected parameters for even Class 5 Deathworlders. How do you explain this discrepancy?" Kale shifted uncomfortably in his chair, which had been designed for a surprisingly different physiology from his own. "I don't know about any parameters or whatever, but I wrestled in high school and do rock climbing on weekends. Plus, adrenaline is a hell of a drug." "Fascinating." Dr. Frill's feathers rippled, a chemical response enhancer activated by threat stimuli. We've observed similar mechanisms in other species, but rarely with such dramatic results. Look, Kale said, leaning forward, I appreciate the scientific interest and all, but I really don't think what happened was that special. Humans have been dealing with predators since, well, forever. It's kind of our thing. Your thing, Professor Kthar repeated, his academic interest still overcoming his earlier nervousness. Is neutralizing apex predators with your bare manipulator appendages. Well, no. Usually we'd use tools, Kale admitted. A spear would have been nice, or, a really big gun. But you work with what you've got. This is exactly the kind of casual attitude towards violence that concerns many Federation species about humans, the Chancellor noted, her crystalline form vibrating with concern. Violence. Kale looked truly confused. I didn't kill it. I could have. Maybe, but that wasn't the goal. The goal was making sure nobody got hurt, including the Thornback, if possible. A moment of silence followed this statement as the assembled aliens processed it. You were protecting the Predator? The security chief asked, his mechanical translator struggling to convey his bewilderment. Well, yeah. It's not like it was evil or anything. It was just doing what comes naturally. Not its fault it got put in a faulty containment field in the middle of a classroom. Kale shrugged. Besides, it's probably pretty rare, right? Endangered, maybe. That would be a shame. Professor Kthar's mandibles clicked rapidly, his species equivalent of clearing his throat. The Pyrian thornback is indeed a protected species. There are fewer than 500 known specimens in existence. Right, so killing it would have been a waste, Kale concluded. Not to mention, it was clearly intelligent enough to problem-solve its way out of your containment. That deserves some respect. Dr. Frill's feathers had shifted to a deep purple of intellectual excitement. This perspective is remarkable. A predator species showing concern for the welfare of another predator, even when under direct threat. This suggests a complex ethical framework that we hadn't previously attributed to Deathworlders. Oh, come on, Kale groaned. You're making it sound like humans are some kind of incomprehensible alien monster. He paused, then groaned. I mean, I guess technically we're aliens to you, but still. We're just people. Most of us don't go around wrestling alien predators for fun. For fun? The Chancellor inquired, alarmed. Figure of speech. Kale quickly clarified. Can we wrap this up? I've got a comparative literature exam tomorrow, and I still need to finish reading The Crystalline Harmonies of Vegan Dusk, which, by the way, loses a lot in translation. The Chancellor's form flickered briefly, her species equivalent of a sigh. Very well. The official investigation will continue, but for now, we see no reason to take any action regarding your involvement, Mr. Kale. You acted to protect yourself and others, and your intervention likely prevented more serious injuries or deaths. Cool. So we're good here. Not entirely, the Chancellor continued. This incident has raised significant questions about security protocols, xenobiological research methodologies, and most relevantly to you, our understanding of human capabilities and behavior. Meaning, Kale prompted. Dr. Frill's feathers rippled eagerly. Meaning, Mr. Kale, that we would very much like to conduct a more thorough study of human stress responses and physical capabilities. Purely voluntary, of course, and under much more controlled conditions. Kale raised an eyebrow. You want me to be a lab rat? A research participant, Dr. Frill corrected, with full academic credit and compensation. And fewer escaped predators, one would hope, Professor Kthar added. Kale considered this for a moment. Would it help other humans attending the university in the future? Make things easier for them? Undoubtedly, Dr. Frill confirmed. Current accommodations for humans are based largely on theoretical models rather than empirical data. Your participation could significantly improve conditions for future human students. And, the Chancellor added, with what might have been a touch of calculated persuasion, it would certainly reflect positively on your species' commitment to interstellar cooperation. Kale laughed. Okay, I see how it is. Appealing to my altruism and my species' pride in one go. He shook his head. Fine, I'm in. but I draw the line at anything involving those little shock fields again. Those hurt. Excellent. Dr. Frill's feathers flashed a bright, happy yellow. We can begin as soon as your academic schedule permits. I have so many questions about your endocrine system, musculature density, reaction times. Maybe we table the specifics for now, the Chancellor suggested, seeing Kale's increasingly weary expression. This meeting is adjourned. Professor Kthar, you will remain to discuss the future of your classroom demonstrations. As they filed out of the conference room, Dr. Frill fell in a step beside Kale, or as close to it as her floating locomotion allowed. I've been studying xenobiology for 73 cycles, she said conversationally, and I've never observed anything quite like your encounter with the thornback. The speed of your risk assessment, the precision of your movements, the apparent casual nature of your problem-solving under extreme stress. It's unprecedented. Kale scratched his neck, a gesture Dr. Frill made note of for future reference. Like I said, just did what needed doing. Any human would have done the same. Would they? Dr. Frill's feathers rippled with interest. Are all humans capable of what you demonstrated yesterday? Well, no, not exactly the same thing. Some would have done better, some worse. But the basic approach, yeah, that's pretty standard human thinking. Fascinating. And what is standard human thinking in a crisis situation? Kale considered this as they walked down the gently sloping corridor, passing members of a dozen different species who, unaware of his recent notoriety, paid him little attention. I guess. Assess the situation, identify the biggest threat, figure out how to neutralize it with minimum collateral damage, then act decisively. He shrugged again. Basic stuff. We teach it to kids. Dr. Frill's feathers went completely still, a sign of astonishment in her species. You teach combat tactics to your young? No, not combat tactics. Just problem-solving, critical thinking, how to keep a cool head in an emergency. Kale paused, then added with a grin, though I guess my high school wrestling coach will be pretty smug about how useful those takedowns turn out to be against an alien death monster. They had reached an intersection where their paths would diverge. Kale toward the humanities complex, Dr. Frill toward the science facilities. One last question, if I may, Dr. Frill said, her feathers now a contemplative green. During the incident, several observers noted that you appear to be talking to the thornback, explaining your actions, even making jokes. What? Kale blinked, truly surprised by the question. Oh, that? Just thinking out loud, I guess. Helps me focus. Plus, humor helps with stress. Keeps you from freezing up. You were making jokes to manage your own fear response. Sure, that. And years of watching action movies where the hero always has a snappy one-liner. Kale stole a glance at her. Cultural conditioning, right? Isn't that what you xenosciences are always going on about? Dr. Frill's feathers shimmered with amusement. Indeed, a most enlightening perspective. Thank you, Mr. Kale. I look forward to our future research sessions. As she floated away, Kale heard her muttering into a personal recording device. Note: human use of humor as a stress management tool during life-threatening situations requires further study. Possible implications for battlefield psychology. Kale shook his head and continued toward his literature class, wondering if his professor would accept I was busy wrestling an alien predator as an excuse for not finishing his reading assignment. 2 weeks later, the Galactic University Infonet highlighted an unprecedented event, the introduction of a new course titled Human Studies, Deathworld Adaptations, and Cultural Perspectives. It was the first curriculum in the university's 3,000-cycle history to focus exclusively on a single species. The course was oversubscribed, with a waiting list that included students from every faculty. Rumor had it that several diplomat corps officers had also requested observer status. Professor Kthar, somewhat surprisingly, had been retained as co-instructor alongside Dr. Frill. His experience with the Thornback incident, while initially seen as a catastrophic failure of safety protocols, had been reframed as a valuable practical learning opportunity in the official university records. And Kale? He had declined the offered position as teaching assistant. He needed to focus on his literature degree. However, he had agreed to give occasional guest lectures, the first of which was titled Apex Predators and Poetry. The The Human Contradiction. His first reading assignment for the class was a very old human text called The Most Dangerous Game, followed by an even older poem called The Tiger. As he explained to Dr. Frill, who had questioned the relevance of these archaic works, if you want to understand humans, you need to understand how we've always seen ourselves, caught between being the hunter and the hunted, the predator and the prey, the monster and the hero. We've been wrestling with that contradiction since before we invented writing. Dr. Frill's feathers had shifted to a thoughtful blue. And have you resolved this contradiction? Cale had laughed. Resolved it? No, we've embraced it. That's what makes us human. The evening before his first guest lecture, Cale stood in his specially modified dormitory room, practicing his presentation. On his desk sat a small trophy the university had commissioned, a miniature sculpture depicting a human and a thornback, frozen in the moment before their confrontation. The plaque read simply, "In recognition of courage, compassion, and cross-species understanding." Cale picked it up, turning it over in his hands with an amused smile. From his home world came a message alert. His parents eager to hear about his alien adventure that had somehow made it into Earth's news feeds, despite being heavily redacted by the Human Diplomat Corps. As he prepared to answer their call, he clarified at the notes for his lecture, particularly the conclusion he had written. The greatest predator adaptation isn't claws or teeth or venom or speed. It's the ability to understand other predators, to think like them, to anticipate them, and ultimately to decide when not to be a predator at all. That's not just a human trait. It's the trait of any truly intelligent species. And if we're going to make this whole galactic civilization thing work, it's the skill we all need to master together. Cale set his notes aside and answered the call from Earth, grinning as his parents' faces appeared on the holographic display. So, his father began without preamble. "We hear you've been wrestling alien monsters between literature classes." "Dad, it's been blown way out of proportion," Cale said, though he couldn't keep the pride out of his voice. It was just one alien monster, and it was more like evasive maneuvering than wrestling. His mother's worried face filled most of the screen as she leaned closer. "The diplomat brief said you were injured. They mentioned minor lacerations, but wouldn't give us details." "Mom, seriously, it's nothing." Cale rolled up his sleeve to reveal a thin, already healing scratch along his forearm. "See? The university medical team patched me up in like 5 minutes. Their Regan tech is amazing. This would have needed stitches back home." His father's expression was a complex mixture of concern and unmistakable paternal pride. "They're saying you saved your professor and half a dozen other students." "Yeah, well, the news always exaggerates." Cale rubbed the back of his neck. "I just kept the thing distracted until security showed up. No big deal." "No big deal." His mother's voice rose slightly. "Cale James Weston, you could have been killed." "Not really," Cale replied with genuine nonchalance. "The thornback was dangerous, sure, but it evolved on a world with like 60% of Earth's gravity. I had a major advantage the whole time." "A thornback what?" his father asked. "Thornback. Big predator with scythe-like limbs. Looks way scarier than it is, honestly." His parents exchanged a look that Cale recognized all too well. The "our son is either crazy or lying" look they perfected during his teenage years. "Look," he continued, "the whole thing lasted maybe 3 minutes. The university has apologized like 1,000 times. They've completely overhauled their safety protocols, and now I'm apparently the poster child for human-alien relations." He gestured to the trophy on his desk. "They even gave me this weird little statue." His mother squinted at the image. "Is that what the creature looked like?" "It looks horrifying." "It's a miniature, Mom. The real one was the size of Dad's pickup truck." There was a moment of stunned silence from both parents. "You fought something the size of a truck?" his father finally managed. "I didn't fight it. I evaded it," Cale corrected. "Big difference. And anyway, it's led to some really interesting opportunities. I've been asked to help develop a whole new course on humans and Earth culture. The xenobiologists here are suddenly super interested in us." "Is that safe?" his mother asked immediately. Cale laughed. "Yes, Mom. It's basically just interviews and some physical tests. Standard stuff. They're fascinated by how humans handle stress. Apparently, most species either freeze up or go berserk when threatened, but our ability to stay calm and think strategically is quite rare. Well, you always were good under pressure, his father acknowledged. Remember that state championship match your senior year? Down 5 points with 30 seconds left. This was a little different, Dad, Kale said with a grin, but yeah, same principle, I guess. We're proud of you, his mother said, her initial worry giving way to acceptance. Just try not to become some kind of interstellar gladiator, okay? You're there to study literature. Trust me, I have no plans to make alien monster wrestling my career. The literature degree is still the priority. Kale refreshed the time display. I should probably go. I'm giving a guest lecture tomorrow, and I need to review my notes. A lecture on what? His father asked. Human perspectives on predator-prey relationships in literature, Kale replied. I'm comparing Hemingway to some Zenturi hunting poetry. It's actually quite interesting how similar the themes are, despite evolving on planets 15 light-years apart. His mother shook her head with a bemused smile. Only you could nearly get eaten by an alien and turn it into a comparative literature project. What can I say? I'm making the most of my education, Kale grinned. I'll call again next week. Love you both. After ending the call, Kale returned to his notes, making a few final adjustments to his presentation. The trophy caught his eye again, and he smiled at the absurdity of it all. 3 months ago, he'd been just another human exchange student struggling with alien syntax and bizarre cultural references. Now he was something of a campus celebrity, the Deathworlder who dances with predators, according to one particularly dramatic Infonet headline. A notification chimed on his university comm. It was from Dr. Frill. Final attendance count for tomorrow's lecture. 342 students from 28 species. University providing additional security as precaution. No predators this time, promise. Sleep well, Kale. He sent back a quick acknowledgement, then stared out his window at the unfamiliar constellations of this world so far from Earth. The moons were rising, 3 of them, casting multiple shadows across the university's bioarchitectural spires. For a moment, he felt the familiar pang of homesickness that occasionally struck him. Earth, with its crushing gravity, volatile weather, and dangerous wildlife, conditions that most galactic citizens found nightmarish, was still home, still the world that had shaped his species, forged them in evolutionary fire until they were tough enough, clever enough, and adaptable enough to reach the stars. But as he looked down at the campus below, where beings from hundreds of worlds mingled and learned together, he felt something else too. Pride. Not just in himself or his species, but in this grand, improbable experiment called galactic civilization. Different bodies, different minds, different evolutionary paths, all trying to understand each other, to find common ground despite their differences. Tomorrow, he would try to help them understand humans a little better. And in doing so, maybe understand themselves better too. Kale closed his notes and prepared for bed, setting his alarm for early morning. As he drifted towards sleep, his mind replayed fragments of the Thornback encounter, but this time without adrenaline clouding his perception. He remembered the creature's movements, powerful, precise, the product of millions of years of evolution. In its own way, it had been beautiful. The most dangerous predator, he murmured to himself, echoing the conclusion of his lecture notes, is the one who can choose not to be a predator at all. In the morning, he would share this insight with hundreds of alien students. For now, though, the human Deathworlder slept peacefully, far from the world that had made him what he was, but carrying that world with him always, in his DNA, in his reflexes, and in his uniquely human perspective on the universe. The lecture hall fell silent as Kale concluded his presentation. For a moment, no one moved or spoke, a rare occurrence in a room containing so many different species with such varied communication methods. Then, from the back of the hall, a sound began. It began as a soft clicking from the insectoid students, joined by the gentle humming of the gaseous vril, the resonant tones of the crystalline furians, and finally, the unmistakable sound of hands clapping from the few other humans in attendance. It was applause, translated across species boundaries into a universal expression of appreciation. Cale stood at the podium, momentarily overwhelmed. When he'd agreed to give this lecture, he'd expected polite interest at best, academic skepticism at worst. He hadn't expected connection. As the sounds faded, Dr. Frill floated to the stage, her feathers a brilliant gold of excitement. "Thank you, Cale, for that most illuminating perspective," she said, her translator rendering her vibrations into speech. "We have time for a few questions from the audience." Appendages, tentacles, and hands rose throughout the hall. Dr. Frill indicated a Morgie student near the front. "You mentioned that humans carefully seek out dangerous activities for fun, activities like climbing mountains or diving into oceans. Is this behavior common among all humans or only certain specialized individuals?" Cale edited it. "Some humans are definitely more thrill-seeking than others, but most of us engage in some form of controlled risk-taking, whether it's physical challenges, creative endeavors, or just trying new foods. It's how we grow." Another student, a methane breather enclosed in a protective suit, was recognized next. "In your analysis of human literature, you highlight the recurring theme of conquering fear rather than eliminating threats. This seems counterproductive from an evolutionary standpoint. Why not simply eliminate all predators from your world?" "We've tried that in some places," Cale admitted. "It usually backfires spectacularly. Ecosystems are complex, and apex predators play crucial roles. Besides, we've learned that the real threat isn't usually the predator itself. It's our fear of it. Conquering that fear, learning to coexist, that's the more sustainable approach." Questions continued for another 30 minutes, ranging from technical inquiries about human physiology to philosophical discussions about Earth's predator-prey dynamics. Throughout it all, Cale noticed something changing in the room, a subtle shift in how the alien students were looking at him. When he'd first arrived at the university 6 months ago, he'd grown accustomed to certain reactions: wary distance, clinical curiosity, or worst of all, the painfully obvious attempts not to appear frightened of the Deathworlder. Now, there was something new in their postures and expressions, something that, across all the physiological differences, he recognized as respect. Not fear, not fascination, but genuine respect. Predator to predator, intelligence to intelligence. As the session concluded and students began filing out, many paused to extend appendages in various species-specific gestures of appreciation. A few even requested to take holographic images with him, which Cale accepted with some embarrassment. Professor Kthar approached as the hall emptied, his mandibles arranged in what Cale had learned to recognize as a genuine smile. "I believe," the professor said, "that was the most successful xenobiological lecture in university history. The engagement metrics were off the charts." "Thanks," Cale replied. "It wasn't too, Earth-centric." On the objection, Professor Kthar assured him, "Your comparative approach was most effective. The parallels you drew between Earth predators and those from other worlds helped contextualize human development in a way our students could relate to." Dr. Frill joined them, her feathers still shimmering with excitement. "The Chancellor is already receiving messages from faculty across multiple departments. There are requests for similar lectures on human approaches to everything from conflict resolution to artistic expression." Cale blinked in surprise. "Really? I was just talking about how we deal with scary animals." "You were talking about perspective," Dr. Frill corrected. "About seeing the universe through human eyes. That has value far beyond xenobiology." As they walked together toward the faculty lounge, Cale noticed something else new: the way other beings in the corridors moved aside for them. Not with the nervous deference he'd sometimes encountered before, but with a different kind of acknowledgement, the kind given to someone who had earned their place. "So," Professor Kthar said as they walked, "I understand you've been invited to join the interspecies athletic exhibition next month. Will you participate?" Cale groaned. "Word travels fast around here. I haven't decided yet." "You should consider it," Dr. Frill encouraged. "It would be an excellent opportunity to demonstrate human physical capabilities in a controlled, positive context." as opposed to a terrifying predator life or death struggle with an escaped one. Kale suggested dryly. Exactly, Professor Kthar agreed, missing the sarcasm entirely. Much more scientifically valid. Kale shook his head with a smile. I'll think about it. But no promises. As they reached the faculty lounge, a message alert chimed on Kale's comm device. It was from the Human Diplomat Corps. Mr. Weston, your recent activities have come to our attention. Your handling of the incident with the Pyrian Thornback and subsequent outreach efforts present human interests admirably. The Corps would like to discuss potential opportunities after your graduation. Please contact us at your convenience. Kale stared at the message for a long moment. This was unexpected. The Cultural Diplomat Corps was notoriously selective, typically recruiting only from Earth's most prestigious universities. For them to reach out to an undergraduate literature major studying abroad, it was unprecedented. Good news, Dr. Frill inquired, her feathers shifting to a curious purple. I'm not sure yet, Kale honestly replied, pocketing the device. Possibly. As they entered the lounge, conversation briefly paused as various faculty members noticed their arrival. Then someone raised a drinking appendage in Kale's direction, a universal gesture of acknowledgement. To the human who showed us that understanding predators is more valuable than fearing them, called out a Zenturi professor of astroethics, and who reminded us that the most important adaptations aren't physical at all. Others joined in the toast, raising containers of various substances that would have been toxic, intoxicating, or simply indigestible across species lines. Kale, feeling his face flush with the human response of embarrassment, raised his own water bottle in return. To galactic civilization, he countered, where a literature student can somehow end up teaching xenobiology and everyone's willing to learn from everyone else, regardless of what planet they call home. As the gathering continued around him, Kale found himself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought him here, not just to this university light years from Earth, but to this particular moment of cross-species connection. He thought about the Thornback, now safely housed in a proper research facility where it was being studied with appropriate precautions. He thought about the lecture he'd just given and how surprisingly receptive the audience had been. He thought about the message from the diplomatic corps and the unexpected doors that were opening before him. Most of all, he thought about perspective, how he had changed and how he might have changed others. In the ancient literature of Earth, humans had always imagined themselves at the center of the cosmic story, the heroes, the conquerors, the ones who mattered most. Now, standing in a room full of beings from dozens of worlds, each with their own evolutionary path and their own perspective on the universe, Kale understood the truth. No one species was the center of the story. The story itself, the grand, improbable convergence of different worlds and different minds, that was what mattered. And if being from a death world gave humans a unique role to play in that story, well, that was something to be proud of, not sorry for. Kale smiled as a Furian professor approached him with questions about Earth literature. Around them, the faculty lounge hummed with the sounds of a dozen different species engaged in the shared pursuit of knowledge. Predator and prey, Deathworlder and Gardenworlder, all finding common ground in curiosity. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't always easy, but it was working. And for a human far from home, on a world full of aliens, that was more than enough.